For those of you who are in charge of a team, could be the whole business or just an individual department, one of the biggest questions I'm asked all the time is, how do I help their performance? Meaning, what do I need to do every single day to help my team improve? Is it the process? Is it refining the process? Is it coaching? Is it listening, mentoring, motivating? And it's probably all of the above. But many people ask, can you give me some tactical advice, some tactical strategies? Well, that's why I brought Mike Simmons on the podcast today. He is the founder of Catalyst Sale, and that's what he does. He helps organizations with these struggles. He helps refine processes, making sure that it's streamlined, getting rid of outdated pieces of the process that are no longer working, as well as helping those in the position to coach and develop team build those skills. He's also the host of a very popular podcast called Finding Your Catalyst, where it's helping people move forward. You know, as he says, actions cause results. That's what I always say. And if you're not really putting in the work, well, then you can't expect the results that you want. So I'm really excited for you to hear our conversation. Mike shares some very tactical things that you can apply today to help your team improve. So let's dive into today's episode of You're in Charge, Now What? With Mike Simmons, founder of Catalyst Sale. Okay, Mike, so thank you so much for being here. I'm always excited when previous guests recommend people to me and say, you really need to talk to this person, especially when it comes to sales. And I think every business, sales is the hurdle, struggle, focus in order to be successful. And I think a lot of people get it wrong. So that's where I want to start. You've had a long career building companies, and now you're working with companies to help them with this specific issue. So if someone's bringing you in to say, help me with sales, where are they going wrong?
Thinking that it will happen really, really fast. Like there's this magic bullet, this kind of shortcut that we're going to be able to come in, and all of a sudden, magically, we're going to increase sales significantly because there's some trick that you as the business owner, you as the founder, you as the leadership team inside the organization just have not been able to figure out, even as you've gone through a couple of different leaders in the business. You think there's always something better. It's kind of like the grass is always greener. There's somebody else has figured it out. It's kind of like health and fitness. When you look at the person who is just in amazing shape and they're on the cover of a magazine, well, they've figured it out. I just need to do what they did. You don't have their genes. You have this technical debt that you've created over a long period of time, yet you believe that just because you have a conversation with them or you bring them into your organization, all of a sudden magic is going to happen. I think that is the biggest challenge. And unfortunately, people like me tend to sell that challenge.
Right. Okay. So you said two things that I want to make sure our audience really, and I want to pick your brain on it. One is that sense of time, right? It is that consistency over time. I just was recording something about the end of year, and I said momentum and compound interest. Building that momentum takes time. But before we get to that, you said something, and it just struck me as there it is. It's that idea of this debt that you've built up of either bad habits, or in the sense of a business, maybe a patchwork of ideas, or just there's no consistency, or maybe there's no process or no accountability. So you have to unravel this debt, it seems like, before you move forward. Did I hear that correctly?
You absolutely nailed it. And many times people forget about it because you think of these paintings that they're discovering in garage sales, where it just gets paint, then layer of paint, then another layer of paint, then another layer of paint, then another layer of paint. And everybody forgets what the first layer of paint was. How do we get here?
Right.
You go through this process of unraveling, asking some really deliberate, difficult questions in some cases, both internally and externally. internally inside your organization, because you've got people who will remember it. And a lot of times people will remember the good and they'll forget your different points, and everybody's perspective of what happened is going to be slightly different. We also forget to go out and have those same conversations with existing customers, with customers that we've lost, with customers that we were not able to win. So if we don't go through the process, how can we expect to get better unless we just happen to get lucky? And sometimes people get lucky.
Right. But so it sounds like, again, what I'm hearing is we all have a problem with just adding on, and it becomes this Frankenstein monster. I've worked with a few clients where I've looked in their CRM, their management tool, and you almost could see when they brought in a trainer, because someone brought their style or their process in and no one did what I call ever did a spring cleaning and went back and just said, are we even using this? And so you just keep layering it on. So how does one do that? Do we have to go back to the core and say, really go back to the basics of, well, what are we trying to accomplish? How do we want to handle our customers? What do we want to say? And then take that work to go through every single step and say, does this match to what we want? If not, get rid of it. Is it that labor intensive?
I think the questions are simple enough that it's not that labor intensive, and it doesn't need to take a long time. This doesn't need to be a 6-month or 18-month rebuild, or refinishing a house. We don't have to do that. It's saying, okay, here's an area that we want to focus on. Let's focus on this first. Let's accomplish that and move things forward. And I think the questions that you ask are really important. They come around some basic who, what, why, where, when type questions. What problem are we solving? Who cares about that problem? Why does the problem persist? Why do they need to solve that problem? And by asking those questions across the organization, you can create better alignment. And when you ask those simple questions, in my experience, what you'll find out is there are different perspectives that people have across the organization that can create this misalignment and start to create friction where it was never intended to exist. And it's really because we're not going back and revisiting those basic items. Now, the risk is someone's listening to this and they're saying, wow, that sounds like a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of time. I have to move forward. I need to keep the business moving. Keep the business moving. You've got to keep the business moving. You can still do this kind of work in parallel. Now, that CRM discussion that you're talking about, where there's this major spring cleaning overhaul, those are nightmare type activities. You don't want to have your revenue team, your sales team going through and doing it. You want to have somebody else take care of it, where the impact on the new customer acquisition side of the business or the success side of the business, whichever area you're focused on, or however you have your team segmented, you're not having those people who are generating revenue going back and doing the cleanup. There's technical ways that you can go through and create the cleanup and just ask those basic questions. So we have this data, we created this field. What are we using it for?
Right.
What does it matter? How is it impacting decisions we make? If we're not using it, it doesn't matter. It doesn't impact decisions. Let's eliminate it and simplify what we're working on so that we can move a lot faster as leaders in an organization, as organizations. So going through the shortcut is actually going through all of the steps and not skipping those steps. Because if you skip the steps, you take on risk, and everybody is okay with taking on a little bit of risk.
Right. Well, but so again, when I love what you keep saying, it doesn't take a lot of time. And that is a fear of people. And that's why I think they keep layering things on is, all right, forget what we did before. We have a brand new widgety thing and a new process, and here's our new process until the next new process comes in. But what I like about this and audience, two things that Mike said. One is asking the stakeholders, the people who are actually in the forefront, at the front line, are you using this? Yes or no? Is this helpful? Yes or no? And then allowing someone else to do that cleanup. We don't want to take the revenue producers time up with something that is not aligned with what they should be doing, which is generating revenue. So I really, really like that idea of really getting team buy-in, allowing people to say, oh yeah, we don't use that, and having the strength to be able to remove that, to put your people in a position to continue to do their work in a streamlined, more efficient, effective way of doing things.
Yeah, that's what they're there for, right? What's the job that they're responsible for? And then think about it, if you fall into the trap, and Glenn, I wish I had someone like you to kind of follow me around and summarize points, because you've taken many more words and bring them down into a fewer words. There's the vicious cycle you get into when you constantly go through and rearrange the deck chairs around the Titanic, or whatever it is, whatever metaphor you want to use. And I know I tend to bounce around on these, but this process that you go through every time you do it, you take people away from their core job, which is either generating demand or developing pipeline from a revenue team perspective. And they might do that with new customers or with existing customers, however your business is structured. When you take them out of that operation and you create these speed bumps that they have to work on that are more operationally oriented, administratively oriented, then you delay the speed to impact that they'll have on their core role. And inevitably, what will end up happening is you'll see the impact in pipeline 2, 3, depending on sales cycles, whatever, you'll see it at some point in the future. And then the question will come up, why is so-and-so behind? And then we forget that we had so-and-so go through and do this cleaning exercise. So be smart with the way that you leverage your resources. And not everybody can afford to bring in other people. What I would suggest, though, is, can you really afford to have your high paid professionals that are out there generating revenue doing this kind of work that you could bring in?
Yes, exactly. You could bring someone. Well, the other thing that I always say to people is, you've been in this position for a year or two, whatever, you've been through using this cycle for a while. Yeah. It doesn't have to all be cleaned up tomorrow, you could set a time frame and say, we'll adjust this a little bit and allow people to do this. But I like that, because also the fact of keeping constantly changing, as you said, rearranging the deck chairs. No one gets a chance to really sink their teeth into a process and do it to see what works or doesn't work, because every 30 days, we have a new idea. Mike went to a conference, came back with a new idea. He read a book. We have a new idea. And so no one really wants to dive in and learn something in too much depth, because who knows, 45 days from now, we might be doing something completely different. So let's pivot a little bit then. So let's talk about, we talked right there about process and structure in there, but you also mentioned something early on about time. Everyone thinks it's going to happen. Do you see that the same with hiring of salespeople, the expectations of performance? I spoke with someone else, Ryan Dowdy, who was a few episodes ago, talking about, we're impatient with new salespeople. We get frustrated if they're not selling today. And again, depending on your sales cycle, the product, whatever it is. How do you see that frustration as well, or impatience, where we almost get rid of people before they're really ready to perform, or, as you said, hit that really threshold of performance?
Yeah. And a lot of times the impatience, it can either be driven by, so yes, I see it. And in some instances it's warranted. And at the same time, we have to be realistic about the way that we evaluate data in order to be able to make effective decisions when it comes to making a change, going through the process of now replacing that rep, or do we add additional coaching or training? What kind of support resources have we put in place to help accelerate the speed to ramp or speed to onboarding? If they're the first rep, or maybe even the fifth rep that you've hired inside an organization over a period of time, it's probably unlikely that you have a consistent model that you can go back to say, this is exactly how a rep should be onboarded and should go through the ramping process. And this is where they should be at a certain period of time.
Right.
What happens is folks go to a conference or they read a book and they say, your senior account executive should ramp up within a 3-month period. Well, in what operating environment, based on what experience, what stage is that company? Are we early stage, pre-product market, pre-revenue? Heck, the ramp time is going to be a heck of a lot longer. Pre-revenue, that first rep is probably augmenting the founder inside the business. Later on down the road, when you've got a couple hundred reps inside an organization, you've got specialized teams, you can kind of plug and play people around, then your speed to ramp is going to be significantly more predictable. Then the next set of questions I might want to ask are we bringing in someone from a new industry into our industry because we believe that they may help us innovate? That new oxygen, the new blood brings new oxygen. They may have a different way of doing things. So now their ramp time is going to be a little bit slower because they're not as familiar with our space. Or am I bringing someone in who was selling the same thing? They were selling, Fords at a dealership in Naperville, Illinois, and now I'm moving them to Fords in, selling Fords in, Ames, Iowa, or some place like that. That's going to be, the expectations are going to be a bit different. And the way that I would summarize that is context matters. If we're not going through and looking at things in appropriate context, asking the right questions, identifying where our blind spots are, we might make our patience might disappear, or reduce, or we might make decisions that are a little bit quicker without complete information. And we might get ourselves into a situation where we're constantly just plugging new widgets into the machine, hoping to get some other result when we're not actually giving our team time or our organization time or our customer base time to actually get really good feedback to determine what's our timeline, not what the market says our timeline should be or what others say our timeline. What's our actual timeline inside our business?
See, I love that because that's really clear to me. And I'm hoping the audience, understood that, because there's so many variables. And one of the variables that you talked about that I never really thought of in that way, but it makes sense. If you're just starting out and you just have a few people that were salespeople, you don't have enough data or runway to really understand what your sales cycle is. So you're still trying to figure out, do I call them? Do I email them? Do I go in front of them? Do I not? All of those variables. Number two would be that idea of, are you even known in your industry, right? So if you're mature enough where, marketing has the ability to create the awareness. So to your example, if I sold Fords and I go somewhere else and I sell Ford, I understand the product. Now I need to understand the, audience, the type of people. Okay, but at least I know the product. But if all of a sudden it's a brand new product, no one's heard of it before, you're not going to get in the door and get those presentations. So that might be a longer runway versus, no, I'm an established Fortune 500 company. People know who we are. We've been doing it for 10 years. Here's our system. And as you said, we have data that we can say, here's our average employee. Here's our average run. Here are the mile markers. That makes complete sense. I don't think a lot of people think that way. I think they all think we're a mature business and we have it figured out, and we don't give people enough runway.
You'd mentioned one of the companies I worked for, company was Safari Books Online. We would refer to ourselves as Safari. We started working there in about 2008. One of the most common responses that I would get when I said I started working for this company called Safari, the web browser, over at Apple,
right?
No, but Safari Books. So you sell books about going to Africa and going out on safari. Like there's just all of this confusion that was out there, and then you know, once people started to connect the dots between Safari and O'Reilly Media and Pearson Technology Group, which were the joint venture partners who started this business, then there was okay, now I understand. But yeah, the expectation that I had, not only of myself, because I started there as an individual contributor, but as we brought reps on, is it was very different to sell Safari than it was to sell Skillsoft, because Skillsoft in the EdTech space, everybody knew who they were. They'd gone through this process of acquiring a company called SmartForce. So yeah, sometimes we lose sight of it because we're so close to our business that and we're talking about it all the time. We just think everybody knows about it.
Right. And that's a great point. I have a very dear friend. He's the owner of a very large advertising and website firm. And he always jokes, I have all of these clients, his few thousand clients. And he says, I think people know who I am. But then I'll go to a large conference, I'll introduce myself and I'll say, hi, I'm the owner of XYZ company. And people look and go, well, what do you do? And he goes, all of a sudden, very humbling to think that not everyone does know who you are. So you have to make sure that you're constantly doing, as you said, that marketing, that branding, expanding, so there isn't any confusion in that marketplace. So building off of what you said briefly in that, when we were talking about time, you said resources for the individual. So that my brain immediately went to training and development of these groups. So when you've built teams, and I think this is a struggle for many, many people who are in the position of leading teams. One is, do they have a process to train individuals ongoing, not just new hire? Have they ever been taught how to train? So if somebody was sitting in front of you and says, I have a team and I'm responsible for their performance. So it's two parts. One is, what are your thoughts on what I should be doing with them daily to help them succeed? Let's assume they're inside where I can see what they're doing. And then number two is, how do I scale that? Like if I need to grow this team, what are things I should be thinking about? So let's start with the first piece, their day-to-day. How would you, in your experience, either have led your team, developed them to make them better? How did you help them grow?
Yeah, big thing. Especially when you're having a team that's all in the same location is really powerful. You can go in a room where there's a whiteboard and you can start drawing some things up on the whiteboard. And when you start doing that, you ideally are getting people around the table or in the room starting to nod and starting to contribute. And there's this high level of engagement where we're learning from each other. So one of the advantages of having a team that's in the same location is you can take advantage of the opportunity of everybody learning together and getting better together, because they can hear the reps that other people are going through. They hear other people on the phone, or they can talk about challenges that they're running into. So I would highlight the importance of collaboration around the team. And one of the things I would look for, especially if I'm coming into a new team, is how collaborative is the team? How well do they get along with each other? Is there one person who just happens to be knocking the cover off the ball, but is an absolute jerk to be around?
Right.
And is there another person who just works really, really hard and is always there, but just hasn't gotten a break? And if we've got different people inside the team dynamic, and I talk with my hands a lot, if I have different people inside the team dynamic, then I want to understand, okay, how can I start to create a culture of collaboration and communication and trust across this team so that everybody gets better together? And you can go to the African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Let's go far. Let's go together. So that's the first thing. I want to assess the team.
Great.
Take advantage of the fact that everybody's in the same room, create a culture of collaboration. Now, the next thing I want to look at is how people are communicating about the things we do. Are we using the same language, or are we describing something as a cup and somebody else describes it as a mug? And does the person who's holding the cup not realize that the cup and the mug are ultimately the same thing? One might have a handle, but if we've got communication challenges across the team, inconsistency around the vocabulary that we're using across the team, then it's going to create some risk inside the business. This is where the training piece comes in. So if we start to agree on certain vocabulary, then we train everybody on the vocabulary. We validate that that's the right vocabulary. I think so. First is, how do we understand the team? How do we create or foster an environment of collaboration so that the team gets better together? How do we make sure that we use the right language so that we're using that same vocabulary and there's consistency in communication? And then the next piece, depending on what I'm seeing there, it's how can we apply coaching inside the organization to help people just take each of those next progressive steps. I think too often we fall into a training trap because we think we're going to bring in a trainer who's going to go up in front of the room, is going to talk about some amazing things, and you're going to get a couple of really cool questions that you might be able to ask some customers, and now everybody's going to get better. Well, we all have run into these meetings where things are said, things are heard, and things are remembered, and everybody hears something a little bit different. Everybody remembers something a little bit different. My experience, that early career leader or new leader coming in, or leader who's working to get better, or someone who's coming into an organization to kind of get the team moving together, I think coaching is critical. And the reason why coaching is critical for me is, if I can coach on a call, or a leader can coach on a call, they can listen to what's happening from a customer perspective. They start to hear that vocabulary. They can see how their team is reacting, and then they can provide coaching, just an additional perspective of what's happening to the person who was on the call. The most common mistake that people like me make in that environment is they turn the coaching into leading the call, and they jump in and they feel like they need to insert their perspective and all of the other things because they're magical and they're the knight in shining armor, and they're not. That gets into the next piece around scale. If you feel compelled to do that on every call that you're on with your team, you are not building a scalable team, because that team is now dependent on you being there each time, and you're not scalable. So those are some long.
No, and you've used, giving you applause, because I believe the exact same thing. And I was hoping you were going to get there. And when you said the word coaching, I was like, yes, because I don't think we do enough coaching. I think we do most businesses do a great job, new hire training, that first onboarding, but it's that ongoing day-to-day coaching. The best teams I've seen, if they have a team internally, and even if it's remote, getting involved to hear calls, to coach them, to give them pointers, to say, here's what you did well, Mike. Great. Do you understand what you did? Yes, you did. Great. Now you can repeat that. Here's where we're going to work, and here's where we're going to coach, and we're going to, so that your team looks at you as an asset. You are my coach, versus manager sounds, ooh, they're going to fire me. We like coaches. We all had coaches in sports. We had coaches for, whatever we did. We like those people because they were there to help us get better, challenge us, versus fire us. And then the other part that I liked what you said, again, very few people talk about this, is creating a dependent workforce. I recorded an episode about this because I was dealing with this with a few clients, talking about, they thought they were doing the right thing. Like you said, not necessarily, they didn't think they were the knight in shining armor, but they thought that's was their job, was to save the sale. So I'm going to jump in to save the sale. But what happened was, everyone then turned around and was trained that you were going to come and do the sale for me, versus learning how to do it themselves. So I thought that was really important. So then off of that, because we just talked about having the team internally, what are because you also coach remotely for your client, like how does the coaching differ, or what things could we do if someone's saying, well, that sounds great, I wish I had my team, but my team is around the country, or they're all working at home remotely. How do I build that culture? How do I coach if they're not in front of me?
I actually think that there are some advantages to having a remote team in this context, because you give people a chance to just go out and do their own thing, and then create an opportunity to come together. So as a leader, one of the best investments I've made over the last couple of years has been putting a whiteboard behind me. We as a team can build together on a whiteboard while on video. And I know that there are some whiteboarding tools that you can use in things like Zoom, but I think there's something that comes out of writing, even though my handwriting is a little bit rough, there's something that comes out of writing things and drawing pictures and seeing things build.
Right.
So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is be very deliberate about when you're going to bring the team together. Just because everybody's in a remote environment doesn't mean you can't bring them together periodically. And most large organizations will have a global sales kickoff. And that's a great opportunity to bring people together, engage them with other members of the organization, not just make it about the sales team. So be deliberate about how you bring people together. In the remote environment, this is how I do it. My team, this last organization I was working with, it was all based in the UK. There was no other option than remote. And over the course of the last 18 months or so, we've all been in some kind of remote environment where we're dealing with Zoom. The thing that I would do, because I couldn't see all of the nonverbal feedback, other than some of the eye contact and the voice, and again, I use my hands. I would everybody on my team knew that there was kind of a code, so to speak, that would give me an opportunity to ask whatever question or make a comment. And at some point in the call, wherever it was, they would say, "Hey, Mike, you've been kind of quiet. Or do you have any questions? Is there anything we missed?" Yeah, any one of those things, whatever felt comfortable to them. I had to, as the leader, not engage in the discussion up until that point, because if I started engaging in the conversation before that point, I could disrupt their workflow, disrupt their train of thought, disrupt the way that they're navigating the call. So I actually think things like Zoom make it much easier to, or much more convenient, excuse me, to provide coaching opportunities. The other thing I would do is at the end of the call, we'd always have 15 minutes to debrief. Now, sometimes we got really busy and calls were going back to back, so we'd have to push some of those debriefs on. But after the client drops off, you can go through and do a debrief on the call, which gets into the, what did you think? What would you, what did you like? What would you have done differently? And then I'll go through and I'll share my notes, and I'll usually do something like, when you ask this question, what was the desired impact, or something to that effect? Or I'll just say, "Hey, that was an awesome call." And we navigated that pretty well. So there's a couple of ways to do the virtual thing. I think there's some danger in, and this might be just me being, the old get off my lawn kind of dude, but there's some danger in the recorded after the fact coaching. Like, one of the cool things about playing sports is those coaches could tell us what they were seeing, sometimes yell at us, but whatever way that they were prodding us, they could say it in the moment. And it was so close to the mistake that we made. When we start doing these things in recorded, asynchronous environments, there's so much time and space between when the behavior happened and when the follow-up happened, or the remediation, or the coaching, or the questions, that the impact isn't as strong. So that's one of the concerns I've got about some of these asynchronous coaching tools that are out there, that a lot of people are getting excited about. But that may just be me.
No, not at all. So I agree. I've always trained, through my years, I would say, don't let like an hour or two go by, because it's still sort of fresh. But if I said to you, Mike, remember the call you just had with Glenn about this issue, it's still going to be sort of fresh. And they'll say, yeah, okay. And then even if you had the ability to play the call for them, they're, oh, okay. If it's tomorrow, they've already made so many other things have happened. It's a long distant memory. Now, again, if you do have the recorded call, that's fine. You can both listen to the call, and it's both objective, and you can go through your process. But unless it's recorded, but even then, so many things have gone on. But what I also liked about what you said, and it's a great lesson for everyone listening, be present for your team. Doesn't mean you have to be the leader of the call. Doesn't mean you have to. I sit in the background on calls, and then I'll listen. But what also I liked was you had time for a debrief. And if you listened, folks, what Mike also did was he didn't tell them what he thought. He asked them first what they thought, right? So again, a great training tip is always asking someone, how did you think you did? What did you like? What didn't you like? Now, if they didn't like something, it probably is something you didn't like either. You know, you're on the same page. But if not, it's okay. I always say, if you ask the question first and they say, well, Mike, here's what I thought, could you help me? They're sticking their hands out to you, opening up and saying, can you help me? If you come at them and say, let me tell you what I heard, they immediately go into defense mode, justification mode, and then nothing gets solved. So I really, folks, if you picked up anything, making sure that you're present, let your team run the call, ask them what they thought, and then wait till they ask you, or in your structure of your call, you're the last person to offer your feedback so that we can move forward. That allows you to be a coach, as you said, and letting them learn to solve their own problems is really key, especially to your point about scaling. I think that's phenomenal advice. Good. So great. So I have one last question, and then we'll get into our final few questions that I ask at the end of every episode. Briefly, there's always been a tension between marketing and sales, right? So sales blames marketing, marketing blames sales. I think the leaning on your marketing department is key for sales success, and marketing leaning on the sales team to find out what are those questions that people are asking, or where are those hurdles, or why are people coming to us versus our competitors, only lends more real value to what you're pushing out into the market from a marketing perspective. In your experience, when you go into a team, right? So you've just worked with this organization for a year, 18 months. Were there conversations with the marketing team, or bringing what you saw, or how did you maneuver that alliance?
Yeah, so I actually took on marketing as part of my remit as the CRO, and failed. And one of the ways that I failed there is I didn't create strong enough alignment across the organization, both in the hiring process and the kind of the tone and the alignment piece, where everybody understood we're all on the same team. We all have the same domain in our email address. We all wear the same logo on our t-shirts. Like we're all in this together. So given that we're all in this together, we're all moving toward the same objective. Let's do what we can to make sure that we accelerate learning so that we can have the impact we need to have. So I failed on that over the last 12 months. What I can do is talk about better experiences, though. Like better experience, it's when you are working hand in hand with each other. There's a high level of communication and trust. The person on the marketing side does their job really. They know their business. They know how to do marketing. I know how to do sales, or my VP of sales knows how to sell. My team knows how to sell. The VP of marketing knows how to market. I trust that people know their jobs. As we go through, there are going to be different things that will come up where, if there's tension, the reason why there's tension is because of either some kind of confusion. Maybe there's confusion about the approach, or where we're going, who we're going after inside the market, or things that have shifted or changed in the market. And the confusion could be on my side from a sales perspective, or on their side from a marketing perspective. But ultimately, the tension's created by some kind of confusion. Another reason the tension could be created is there might be confusion around what matters. What's the actual number that we're moving toward? Are we more focused on leads that are generated, or are we more focused on revenue that is generated? If we're more focused on leads because there's some value in that number, then okay, let's focus on that. If we're more focused on revenue, let's make sure that the leads are actually converting and contributing to the revenue. So an alignment relative to objectives, so that there's not a level of confusion between the two organizations, even if they're inside the organization, is extremely important. And for whatever reason, we create, and I don't know why. I struggle with why this continues to happen, but it continues to happen. But for whatever reason, we create this tension because we tend to misalign objectives and measure things that aren't necessarily contributing or converting to the thing that we're moving toward. And the reason why, I think the primary reason why we do it, even though I said I don't know why, I think the primary reason is we don't ask ourselves the question about what really matters. Like, what's our focus?
Right.
What's our actual objective? What's our North Star? What are we moving toward? Why are we moving toward it? How can we get there? How will we measure to determine, are we actually moving toward it, and create this alignment inside the organization? So this oil and water challenge between sales and marketing, I think comes down to confusion. I think it comes down to misalignment on goals and objectives. I think it comes down to a lack of trust. And I think it comes down to, in some cases, the agenda of the person putting themselves before the organization rather than putting the organization first.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I struggle with that as well, why it exists, because when it's worked well, when marketing comes to you and says, okay, here's our message that we were pushing out. Is it connecting? What are you hearing from your prospects? As I said, why are they talking to us versus their competitor? What's our difference? Or from sales saying, we're not different enough. We're not doubling down. Our customers are asking about this, and we have nothing in our marketing that talks about this. So I'm winging it. I think, to your point, is everyone's, one, not talking enough, and two, I think your point is the objective. If you're thinking as a salesperson, I need leads, I need people, I need hand raisers, and the marketing is doing, yes, a little about that, but they're doing a longer pipeline type of marketing and funnel. And, you want people who want to buy right now, and some of their interest or leads are higher funnel. And so there's that frustration where you're not giving me enough things to sell, and marketing saying, well, the ones I'm giving you, you're not selling, and it becomes this fight when truly there are two sides of one coin. Marketing needs sales, sales needs marketing, and I wish they could be better aligned.
I think just to add a couple of more points, and I know you said be brief, and then it's just one of those things you get excited about, and you just jump right in. But
this is good stuff.
So think of the customer journey discussion that you just went through. You said, look, everybody is, they may be at the initial phase of not even realizing that a problem exists. And so not only do they not know that a problem or that your organization exists, they don't know that they actually have the problem, but there's some content that creates a sense that a problem exists. And now all of a sudden the sales rep is contacting them immediately, asking them about economic buyer and decision-making process and all of those other things. They're not meeting the rep. The individual is not meeting the individual on the other side where they are. And if we think about what marketing and sales do really well, as a sales professional, I should be able to meet one-on-one with people, and maybe even one-on-one with groups of people, but I should be able to be in a room, read the room, have a conversation, be really good at getting feedback from that conversation and reacting to those feedback loops, because I can adapt and iterate in real time based on the information that's coming at me. On the marketing side of things, even though the data continues to get better and there's a quicker speed to impact or speed to those feedback loops, remember, marketing doesn't ever see the customer directly. They're right, at least from what I understand, they're mainly communicating out to large groups of people who, in a lot of cases, they'll talk about personas, and these are fictional characters that align with a specific avatar of who we're selling to. On the sales side, we're actually dealing with real people. So if we think about it, marketing has a really difficult job to compel people to take a certain amount of action where somebody else isn't in the room. On the sales side, we have the opportunity to respond and react to people in the room. If we're struggling with communication, imagine how much value we could get by working with our partners on the marketing side to get an understanding of how they communicate when people aren't in the room, so that we can ask better questions when people are in the room and start to see people nod and engage and provide that feedback. this is an area where I think both of them can really come together and we can learn from each other. Now, on the marketing side, we should also be able to say, look, as you're out there engaging with the rep, when you bring these things up, how are people responding? How's the market responding? Are people leaning in? If they're not leaning in, maybe we don't want to talk about that as much in all of this stuff that we're spending money on. So yeah, the alignment is so important. And when it works, when there's this partnership, and there are a couple of times I've worked with a couple of amazing marketing professionals where there's been that alignment, it's magical when it works.
Oh,
it's
no,
when it doesn't.
I agree. We in our agency, we talk about it all the time, is myself and the people who are selling have meetings with the marketing team, and the marketing team will say, what questions did they ask you? What topics did they start asking you about? So if they start the conversation, how are you different than other agencies? Well, then we as marketers need to push that out. What stuck with them? Was it the fact that we are smaller, or we are customized, or we do X? Great. Because if not, marketing, as you said, is guessing, throwing a wide net, hoping that something's going to connect. But if you came back from sales and said, the last 3 people talked about they are having this issue, marketing should say, ooh, let's go come up to a way where when we talk about that, we have a solution, and someone goes, oh, I have that problem. They have a solution. As you said, it draws them in. But without that information, there are these misses and frustrations, because then the blame game comes because we didn't talk to anyone. We just said, well, marketing doesn't know what they're doing. And then sales isn't doing this, versus collaboration. I think more collaboration and those conversations, when you have the conversation saying, if I talk to sales, I'm going to get really good stuff. It's going to make my marketing better. And then the salespeople understand what marketing does and maybe create something specifically for that salesperson. They feel engaged that these folks are helping me. They're a resource, not an enemy.
Yeah. Yeah. We're all in this together. I think that's the thing. Like, we're all in this together. If you're part of the organization solving a really important problem out in the marketplace for a specific set of customers, you're all in this thing together. You're all working toward the same thing. Start working toward the same thing.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. All right. That's a great place to sort of wind down here. So first off, Mike, I love the fact that you're here. You're passionate. I love these because I try to think, time, and what you were just saying got me fired up. And so great value for the audience today. I think they're going to get a lot out of it. So as we wind down every episode, I usually ask 3 or 4 questions. I call them the one, which is just whatever one word pops into your head. They're random questions, have nothing to do with anything that we were just talking about, maybe, but I ask them. And so let's just jump right in. So what is one thing that you are reading, listening to, or watching that is inspiring you that you would want to share with the audience?
I mean, I'm reading the book Peak Mind right now. And I'm both reading and listening, and I don't have the author right in front of me, but
we'll get it and well put it into the show notes.
Just listening to the perspective this author has around neuroscience and impact on attention is inspiring me to be more present when I think I'm present. Like, I'm one of those people who thinks I can watch a football game and still have a conversation at the same time. And then I will miss the gorilla that walks through the kids passing the basketball back and forth to each other. Right. So like, there's this, I believe that I'm very attentive, and then right up into the point that I'm not. So that's what I'm digging into right now. That is inspiring me to get better at being present and being where my feet are.
That's spooky, because when I did my year-end wrap up, one of the words that I said for 2022 is presence, and when you said being present, I always say be present where your feet are. So aligned. Love it. Love it. Love it. What is one place in the world that you haven't traveled to that you would like to travel, assuming we get rid of all of these travel bans? Where would you like to go?
Singapore.
Oh, Singapore.
I've never been to Asia Pac, and
Love to. Yeah, that's one of those is on my checklist. Japan, all of that whole area is on mine. But Singapore, I've had my brother went there and he said, phenomenal. What is one piece of advice that you received from someone that really helped you on your journey?
Retired Colonel Chuck Schluter. As I said, leaders provide guidance, direction, and motivation. And when I think about it, I think of guidance, the kind of the engagement, the listen. In order to provide guidance to someone, you have to be there, listen, engage, and then you can share and provide some kind of perspective. So they provide guidance, they provide direction, they know where to point the light. Like we can get so distracted and move around and around in circles, and leaders can help us point the light, or we as leaders should help point the directional light for the organization. So direction, and then motivation, helping people understand how the things that they're working on align with the things that are important to them, so that when things get rough, they can stay the course, maintain the level of commitment, and just continue to move forward. Because if all of this stuff was easy, everybody would be doing it, and the hard work is just part of the process. So, Colonel Chuck Schluter, leaders provide guidance, direction, and motivation.
Great. Two more. If I took your family, friends, close people who know you, put them in a room and said, describe you with one word, what would that one word that they would use?
Passionate.
I would think that's a pretty good, after just being on the thing with you here for a while, I would say passion is definitely something I would say. All right. Final question. We've talked about a lot of things here. And again, jam-packed with great content. If you hoped that the audience, people listening, took one thing away from everything that you shared today, just one, what would that one thing be?
Everything that we talked about focused around actually going out and doing work, not thinking about doing work, not going around and round in circles and talking about all of the things we could do. It's focusing on going out and doing something. So as a leader who's coaching your team, join calls, that's doing work. Listen, that's doing work. Engage when appropriate, that's doing work. Provide feedback, that's doing work. Going through the data that we started with, that's doing work. You've got to go out there and do the work, not just think about the work or talk about the work. You've got to go do the work.
Man, I love that. That is great. That is great. And I could not agree more. Hard work in general, that's the deciding, that's the differentiator. And I appreciate that. So Mike, again, thank you so much for being here. This was a great conversation. So tell everyone how they can connect with you. Tell them about your podcast. Tell them about, where I'll link everything in the show notes, but I want to hear it from you. I've listened to some of your episodes, really great stuff. So tell people how they can connect with you.
Thank you. The best place to find out about what we're working on from a business is catalystsale.com. catalystsale.com, and you should be able to link out to all of the social pieces. The social media area where I'm most active is Twitter, Simmons_M. And I'm also getting back into LinkedIn. I've been on a milk carton, so to speak, over the course of the last couple of months from a social media perspective. Those are the best places to interact. Don't send me an email. Email is where things just go to die.
Right.
But interact on Twitter, LinkedIn, really good places, and then always catalystsale.com. Glenn, this has been absolutely awesome. Thank you very much for having me on.
Podcast. What's your podcast?
Oh, sorry. Thank you. The podcast is Find My Catalyst. It has just recently been rebranded. It was the Catalyst Sale podcast. We took the word sale out just because I thought we could go to a much broader audience. And
Absolutely.
The focus of the podcast is helping people overcome this challenge that they have relative to confidence and just be able to take that next step relative to doing the work, find that catalyst that gives them the nudge to help them do the work. And I bring people on who are either catalysts in my life, catalyst for me based on what I've heard or seen, or catalyst in others' lives that help inspire them to take that next step through practical execution, the work, not talking about theory and ideas around how this stuff should work, but people who've actually experienced it. So that's the Find My Catalyst podcast.
All right. So listen, folks, please connect with Mike. As you listened, the goal, it seems like this is great alignment because both of our podcasts are aligned to provide tactical, strategic things that you can do, not think about, but do. But if you listen to everything Mike talked about today, it was all about action. It was what you could do. So listen to this over and over and over again, share it out with your team. Please connect with Mike. Valuable. His information is great. I recommend it highly. It'll bring you great value. So again, Mike, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time. And folks, as you know, at the end of every episode, I tell you, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast out on Apple, or if you're an Android user on Spotify, you can jump over to the YouTube channel to watch Mike and I both. Please make sure you share it out. I'm sure there's a few people in your network that could benefit from what Mike said. It's really valuable. Again, I know there's a lot of places for you to consume content, but the fact that you shared time with Mike and me means the world as well. And as I say at the end of every episode, you're in charge. But if you ever feel like, well, now what? What do I do next? Well, we're here weekly to provide you tips, strategies, and hopefully a few laughs to make you both better professionally and personally. So again, thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Mike, again, great meeting you. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the value you brought to the audience today.